All right, Aaron, Brian, I got 2 o'clock Eastern. Is it okay if I go ahead and get this party started?
Let's go. Let's do it.
All right, awesome. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good morning if you're on the West Coast, I should say. And if you're watching the recording, I hope you're having a good day no matter when and where you are. We are here to talk about capital campaigns, specifically counting the costs where capital campaigns often miss the mark. It's going to be a good one. I love this topic. And I'm so happy to see a full room here. I'm Steven, I'm over here at Bloomerang, and I'll be moderating today's discussion as always. And just a couple of quick housekeeping items. Just want to let everyone know that we are recording this session. So if you have to leave early, or maybe you get interrupted, or you just want to review the content later on, maybe share it with a friend or a colleague, you'll be able to do that because I'm going to send you the recording, also going to send out the slides. So don't worry, I'll get all that good stuff in your hands later on today. And you'll be able to review the content as much as you want. But most importantly, I want to recommend and encourage all of you to chat in your questions and comments throughout the next hour or so. We're going to try to leave some time at the end for Q&A. So don't be shy, don't sit on those hands. We'd love to hear from you. Introduce yourself if you have not already. But keep the questions coming. There's a chat box and a Q&A box. You can use either of those. You can send us a tweet. However you want to send a message. You can even email me if you want, although that might be a little harder than the other things, but we'd love to hear from you. So don't be shy. And if this is your first Bloomerang webinar, welcome. We do these webinars just about every Thursday. We love doing these webinars. It's one of our favorite things we do here at Bloomerang. But if you've never heard of Bloomerang beyond the webinars, we are first and foremost a provider of donor management software. So check that out if you're interested. Maybe if you're shopping before the end of the year, want to make a switch, you can visit our website, learn all about us. Lots of videos on there you can watch. But don't do that right now because you all are in for a treat over the next hour or so to learn about capital campaigns from my buddies Aaron and Brian, both of them joining us actually in a room together, which is awesome, from beautiful Alabama. Gentlemen, how you doing? You doing okay?
Doing great. Thanks for having us, Steven.
Yeah, this is awesome to have you both here. I've been getting to know you a lot more over the last few weeks, and like I said, love the topic. And this is one where these guys definitely have a lot of knowledge. If you don't know Aaron, he is the founder over at Bright Street Solutions. Check them out. They do a lot of really great consulting and placement if that is something that is of a need from you. He's over in Birmingham, and like I say very often on these sessions, I always look for folks with that firsthand fundraising knowledge. He's been a VP, he's been in your shoes, and certainly has been involved with a lot of capital campaigns. And joining him also from Alabama is Brian O'Neill. He's the ED over at Third Lens Ministries. We were talking before the session started. They've got a lot of really interesting projects, a lot of capital campaign projects going on, especially overseas. So if any of you work overseas, you might want to connect with him as well, even especially if you're in the ministry world too. So I'm excited. I'm going to pipe down. This is your show, guys. So I'm gonna stop blabbing on here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'll let you bring up your beautiful slides here, and it'll be your show. Yeah, looks like it's working. Take it away, my friends.
Sounds great. Well, thank you, Steven. Well, my name is Aaron Bishop. As Steven said, I'm with Bright Street Solutions, a full-service consulting and placement firm in Birmingham, Alabama. I'm glad to be with you today. Brian, you want to say hello as well?
Yeah. Hey, I'm Brian O'Neill, Executive Director of Third Lens Ministries, nonprofit based in Atlanta. As Steven mentioned, living in Alabama, and we provide program management services to other nonprofits. For those not familiar with that term, program management includes representing the owner or the nonprofit at every step of the development process, from land acquisition, going through due diligence, the design, pre-construction, and the construction to move-in phase. We've been around for 12 years and have really focused on connecting volunteers from the architecture, engineering, and construction industries with opportunities to give back, and then assisting nonprofits with their building needs. I was sharing with Steven earlier, we're working in about 20 different countries and are managing $50 million in development costs. So excited to spend some time with my good friend Aaron and my new friend Steven and talk about capital campaigns.
Yeah, sounds good, Brian. And the way that Brian and I know each other, we're strategic partners when we work with organizations. I look at the fundraising and the revenue aspects, and Brian's team of construction experts really brings value and creates a streamlined process for the actual project itself. So we're excited to be with you today. We're really passionate, like many of you, about capital campaigns. And as you all know, capital campaigns have been around for a long time. There are so many resources available to ensure that your organization has a successful campaign. You think about the various models that are out there, the templates, the timelines, the job descriptions, the consultants. I mean, the resources really seem to be endless. You know, and in that same vein, much has been made about the common pitfalls or the mistakes that your organization should avoid to ensure your success. So if you've conducted a capital campaign or you've researched a campaign for one that's on the horizon for your organization, you're well aware that a capital campaign is a balance of, you know, it's an art and a science to ensure its success. Today, Brian and I really want to take a bit of a different approach. We want to look through a different lens into these campaigns. We know the stress points. We know that the burdens that can pop up, the mistakes, the challenges within these campaigns, and much has been made about them. We want to talk about what the construction aspect looks like for your organization, what your role is in that process, and some things that you can be thinking about that can keep you doing the things that you do every day well and share the responsibilities with some of the experts. And so that's our goal for today. And so with that being said, you know, I am a fundraiser at heart. That's my passion. And so we're going to talk about the capital campaign. But for those of you who are new to capital campaigns, I just don't think that it would be prudent if we didn't at least mention some of those missteps in the planning and execution of a capital campaign. So I have a few listed here. These are not exhaustive by any means, but they're just something for you and your teams to be thinking about if you haven't addressed them yet. So I'll just move through this pretty quickly. But the first one that I've listed is the lack of a feasibility study. It still amazes me that organizations debate whether or not this is important. And I know that there are organizations out there who have not done a feasibility study and been successful, but I'm a big advocate of the feasibility study. It really reiterates the community's perspective about your project and reinforces the need for it. One of the things I like about the feasibility study is that if you're discussing your project with the right people, it actually warms the donor in the community to your project for the beginning of your solicitation process. So feasibility study is an important part. The second one that I commonly see organizations struggle with is rushing through or rushing out of the quiet phase. You know, it's kind of difficult to harness the passion of volunteers and advocates. And so it's not uncommon that as you're working through your gift tables and your commitments, that your leadership or your donors will want to rush out and, you know, launch the social media campaign or start a new grassroots initiatives. And the capital campaign is a sequence of events that's methodically planned. And obviously the majority of the funds are raised in the capital campaign. We always advocate that you hit that threshold of right around 65% before you move out of that quiet phase. I know that number or that needle can move a little bit depending on the organization, but anywhere from 50 to 55% to 70% of the threshold is where your organization should be before you move out. And then two others that I'll just mention real quickly, and these really go hand in hand, not having a realistic goal. I have a lot of clients or prospective clients that will come to me and say, you know, we've met with our contractors, we've looked at our plans, we have our renderings, and we need to raise $10 million. And that all may be true. That may be the state of the union for them. But the other question that they have to really think through is, well, what can we do? What's our capacity to raise those funds? So I always remind them it's a combination of what we need versus what we can do. And when those align well, when they intersect where they need to be, then you're on good footing for your plan. When they don't, it's not that can't be your number or your plan. It's just that we need to figure out where are the gaps and what's missing in your plan. And that's what leads to the fourth one here is the lack of prospects. Not having a deep enough pipeline for your prospect, not being able to build out your gift tables. A capital campaign is all about momentum. Momentum is really important. And so for organizations who get a great start in their quiet phase and then slow down or stall, even worse, you need to have a plan for replenishing your pipeline, for having a deep enough pipeline. I told someone just last week, capital campaigns are a challenge in and of themselves. The only thing that I can think of that's more difficult is jumpstarting a dead campaign or a stalled campaign. And so the pipelines and just being able to understand what's needed and who your prospects are is just incredibly important. So these are just a few for you to think of. So there you go. We've been prudent fundraisers today. We've mentioned these, and I know there are more out there that you all could add to in the chat room there. But as I think about these obviously play a part into the scope of your project, the amount that you'll be able to fundraise. And when I think about where clients are with their campaign and their goals and where they tend to move forward with their project, I think they're kind of in two buckets. Organizations who have done a capital campaign before and they're very comfortable with the construction part of that campaign. They understand what they need to fundraise. They just may need some support in a few segments of that campaign. Or there's a second bucket that I'm really sort of anecdotally seeing a strong movement to, or a strong trend in the community. And that's a group of organizations, nonprofits, who are relatively new in their fundraising and really new to the capital campaign landscape. And if you think about the nonprofit industry as a whole, I mean, it makes sense, right? 1.5, 1.6 million nonprofits in the United States. And you think about the number of new nonprofits over the last 15 years, 200,000, give or take, new nonprofits. And these are organizations who have been successful. They're meeting the need in the community, and they're just coming into their first capital campaign project. Now, they probably, worked on a shoestring budget, or they've really worked to streamline their resources. They're wearing many hats for their organization. They're growing into the way that they're able to impact the community. One of the examples I can think of here, this is an organization in Birmingham. They're called Unless You, and this is their executive director in the front, Lindy. Unless You was started about 10 years ago in Birmingham. Lindy went to college, and she has a brother with special needs. And she was heartbroken because he couldn't have the same college experience that she had. And so it was her goal to start a nonprofit to give him and his friends the same kind of college experience. So she created a nonprofit. First time they met, her brother and three of his friends met in someone's basement in a home to start with their curriculum and their college type experience. And they began to grow. They moved to a transitional campus, and they began to add students and kind of expand their services to those students. And just this year, this is them. Their building is actually complete, but Unless You finished a multi-million-dollar capital campaign, the first that they've ever undertaken like this. It was wildly successful, but you can see Lindy's quote here. She really streamlined the fundraising process, but it was the construction aspect that really kind of ate up her daily schedule and just cut into what she was trying to accomplish as the executive director, the principal, the admissions counselor, the head of financial aid. I mean, you're wearing so many hats in a relatively new nonprofit. And so, not all organizations are able to navigate that and be successful the way Lindy has been. And so that's why I'm excited for you all to meet Brian in Third Lens today, because Brian's team, a group of construction and design experts operating as a nonprofit to help organizations kind of be a liaison between the contractors and the actual job itself. So Brian, I guess I would turn it over to you. Just to start us off here, the state of the union as you see it between nonprofits and the construction industry when you're working with clients to build out their projects. I think that's a loaded question. And in this day and age with COVID impacting so many variables in the construction process, what are you seeing with nonprofits and how they're navigating this?
Yeah, so, the last 18 months has certainly been a challenge. And for those that aren't aware, in relation to the construction industry, construction globally and in the United States has continued to grow, and it hasn't stopped throughout the pandemic. But what we have faced is more challenges with availability of materials and prices. If you've built a house or know somebody that's built a house recently, lumber prices last year just went through the roof, and builders used to be able to lock in pricing for 6 months, and now nobody will guarantee, regardless of the size of your company, the value of a 2x4 for more than 7 days. Additionally, right now paint's hard to find, or is becoming harder to find, because last year there was an ice storm in Texas and Louisiana, and which is where most of our paint is refined and made and shipped out to Home Depot and Sherwin-Williams. And in that storm, a bunch of them lost capacity because of broken pipes, and only about 20% of them are back up full. So that's been a challenge industry wide. Those are the conversations we have on a daily basis. The neat part of COVID for nonprofits, and I hear this almost on a weekly basis, is that our nonprofit friends and ministry partners have raised more money in COVID than they did any year prior. And it's people have just found generosity. Maybe they found that where their checkbook was while they were quarantining at home. But our partners are raising a bunch of money, and so what we were able to do is the beginning of last year, instead of sitting on our hands and resting on our laurels, we said, let's dream really, really big, and let's really think about what the world looks like post COVID. And so, not knowing this, 6 months, 18 months, where we would end up and where we are now, and really thinking through, okay, what happens when the world opens up back again and we're able to approach donors and ask for big gifts? And that was the assumption. And so we started design processes on things that were a year to 5 years down the road. We started doing master plans. And what we found is that we could really add a ton of value and cast vision. And now that's starting to come to fruition. You kind of asked, about our experience working with various nonprofits. The ones that are doing the process of planning for a project really well, they treat it like the marketplace does. They treat it like a for-profit business. They have a process, or we work through a process of what steps do we take one after another to get to the point where we can launch that capital campaign. And what they're doing in that is they're building donor confidence, because if they plan it well, they execute it well. The ones that we see that are struggling, that we're helping a lot, are the ones that, if they don't have the process, it presents immense amount of risk, assuming you miss a step, and next thing you know, your budget's blown, or the land, you can't build what you want to build on it. And that's where the projects and the organizations really can lose credibility in a number of different ways. But over the past 12 years, because we have access to industry leading construction companies and architects and engineering firms, we've kind of learned also through stubbing our toe a couple of times a process for helping get that capital campaign ready to launch. And we called it Project Launch, just because we know that when you're ready, Aaron, to launch that campaign, we want to make sure that we've given you all the information to be successful. And so the nonprofit knows how much they need to raise, they're able to tell a great story, and they're able to communicate a solution to an obvious need. So yeah, that Project Launch has been good for us. And today we formalized it and are now running with it.
I think that makes sense. And I can completely understand how that would increase donor confidence as they're learning about the project and learning about the parties involved. One of the things is Brian and I prepared kind of some content to share with nonprofits about what are some things that you could be thinking about as it relates to a well-run or a poorly run construction part of your campaign. We created 4 takeaways for you here, and you can see them. We're going to walk through each one of these, because I think for me as a fundraiser, I had, probably naive on my part, I had this preconceived notion that an organization, scientifically creates their fundraising plan, they build buffers into it, and then throughout the process, based on the renderings and the drawings, they hand it off to the contractor and everything's copacetic moving forward. And that was pre-COVID. So I'll be interested to hear your take as it relates to some of these, and how a nonprofit should be thinking about that, and then what they should be, the questions they should be asking and the variables that they should be considering throughout this process, and some of these 4 areas that we've highlighted. So the first one on your screen there is rushing through the planning process. Brian, I had a potential client who had an urgent need, tremendous mission. They were kind of uniquely positioned in the community to meet this need, but they needed facilities very quickly. And so before their case for support was even dry, before they mapped out their gift tables, their leadership team they were soliciting gifts in the community because the need was urgent, which is understandable. But again, the capital campaign is about a sequence of events. And so I can see where we rush through the process in fundraising, and I know the reasons why we tend to do that. But from the construction aspect, I mean, you mentioned project launch. What are you seeing organizations do well that sort of puts the sequence in order for them to manage their cost and to manage the process well from the get-go?
Yeah, so being a project manager, I'm very process oriented, as is most of our staff, and so every project's unique, and every process for each project ends up having its idiosyncrasies. But if you've kind of got a roadmap, which is the template, project launch is just a template that we customize for the needs of each of them. But if you've got a process and you can take it step by step to get you to your end goal, which is launching the campaign, what you're doing is you're eliminating the opportunity for risk to arise. The scariest thing for me on a project is not knowing what I don't know. And so if we can uncover all those risk variables, address them, invite people in to help us overcome them, then inevitably, as we reach the finish line, our success it's not necessarily guaranteed, but we're mitigating risk along the way. We approach a project. I mentioned, marketplace for profit. It's almost the same way a real estate developer would approach a new project. How do we go from A to Z and do it with diligence? In fact, one of the blessings over COVID has been that our new COO, Bill McMahon, he did this professionally for hospitals for over 20 years. And, he actually, in his business, had project launch as a formal product that they did for major hospital systems. He's built some of the largest hospitals in the Southeast and up the Mid-Atlantic. And so in that, he actually shared a template with us, which I'll share on the screen now. It's just a structured approach, walking you through. And it's not necessarily, the where all be all. We didn't invent this. Industry professionals have been doing this for decades. But what we have been able to do is walk with our partners to identify what steps we need to take with them. And that starts kind of with a readiness assessment and a gap analysis. That's our internal evaluation of, are they even ready? Is an organization even ready financially, operationally to venture into talking about a new facility? Then we look at land acquisition and land planning. They may have their own piece of property. How do we appropriately use certain parts of it and talk about long term? If you put a building in the middle of your land, but then it prevents you from growing, we've shot ourselves in the foot. So thinking big, 10 years plus down the road, and then building the immediate needs out from there. And then, one of the fun parts is getting an architect involved and talking about the program. What are the needs of the building, and starting to lay out a floor plan and doing some renderings. For us, that's called conceptual design or schematic design. That's where you have those visual tools to put in front of a donor that they can go, I see. And now I see what you're talking about. Wow, that really is neat. When I was in real estate development, it was told to me by somebody way smarter than I am that only about 10% of the population can look at a floor plan and visualize what it would look in from 2D to 3D. And so now we're able to create those, it is two-dimensional. In some cases, we're able to do 3D modeling, but how do we create those visuals to cast vision for what a project potentially look like, and then putting together a budget, and not just a budget that we said, oh, that's $1 million building. It's a number that has science and has input from industry professionals in. And at the end of our project launch phase, we're actually now producing a fundraising packet, and that fundraising packet allows our partners to sit across from that donor and say, here's the need, here's the process, here's the cost. Would you join us in this adventure? Just sharing an example, one of our newest partners, Church Mission Network, based in the Nashville area. I met them in the fall, and we had conversations after the New Year's, and their executive director, Phil Johnsey, says, hey, we have a need. We have a vision to build a sickle cell centric hospital in Western Kenya. Sickle cell is kind of a low, visibility, but a high mortality rate in East Africa, and it's not being addressed. So there's a need. But Phil openly admits, our core competency is planting churches and feeding children. And, I love talking to Phil because he's like, you're the professional. I trust you. Go, here's the vision, run with it. So over the past several months, we've been working with, indigenous architects, the local doctor that's going to oversee, the opening and the management of the project. And then, we're by the end of the year, we'll be able to provide him with a rock solid fundraising packet where he can go share the compelling story of why this is important, where he can sit down and say, we've counted the cost. Here's how much it's going to take for us to break ground and invite that donor, that foundation to come sit down with them. And as I mentioned before, it's no different than a real estate developer. The real estate developer is going to follow a very similar process to put together a plan to go sit down with investors or a bank to get funding. We're just doing it in the context of the nonprofit. So, our quote here is trust the process. I talk about it with our team and our partners all day long. We're going to plan our work, and then we're going to work our plan. And if you don't have a process, you don't have a plan, then how are we showing up every day trying to, push the needle to the next step?
I think that makes sense. Can you go back to that slide? Because for me, being process oriented, I think this is a huge confidence builder. You talked about for donors. I think for executive directors and board members to work with either the board or, a subcommittee, a legacy committee, whoever that might be. I can imagine though, if I'm an executive director and I'm thinking about a project on the horizon, there are some that will be at the very beginning of this process, but for others, you might have already met with an architect, or you might be down the road with a contractor already. Whether it's your model or another model, is it plausible for organizations to come in midway through this process and pick up and leverage a resource like this?
Yeah, totally. We actually had a conversation yesterday with a large ministry outside of Atlanta that they've kind of already taken some steps. They're engaged with a nonprofit consultant. That's working on a feasibility study. They have some existing relationships. Integrating in and then covering some bases is I mean, if you're 10% or 80% of the way through it, there's a way for us to come in and in general be able to make sure that by the time you get ready to launch that campaign, you've checked all the boxes appropriately.
I think that's great. I think from thinking about my role as executive director back in the day, I would have loved to have a resource like this or one similar to it where I could just talk through it with maybe a board member who's in the construction industry or somebody that's involved in the project. So I think this timeline or this process is phenomenal. So I want to move on to the second element that we want to talk about today, and that's the cost in general. There's an old statistic that 65% of all capital campaign costs will increase from the initial estimate. So basically 2/3. Now that's a pre-COVID statistic. So I can imagine if you told me it was 100% today, I'd believe you because of all the fluctuation in the market. But when you think about a nonprofit who's engaging into a capital campaign and planning for their cost of the project, what are the things that you're fact checking to ensure that they include, or maybe the better question is, what are the things that nonprofits are forgetting to include?
Boom.
Thank you for that affirmation. Whoever just yelled boom. So, on our team and with our partners, we talk about counting the cost, and that has some implications. We're a faith-based organization, and biblically there's a parable that talks about, suppose if you wanted to build a tower, would you not first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if laying out the foundation and not being able to finish, then everyone would look at it and ridicule you saying, this person began to build but wasn't able to finish. So, one of our main things is have we counted the cost? Have we factored in everything? And then have we planned for the unexpected? The construction budget is only one line item in a development budget. And that's probably the first thing I tell our partners when it comes to costing, because you'll have permitting fees, you may have, some design fees, you may have to do some testing with surveys or geotechnical studies. And then, we'll talk about contingency in a minute, but as you approach your budget, there's two main ways. And I've shared images of two recent projects. The first is Plywood People. It's a space in the west end of Atlanta for nonprofits and startups and social entrepreneurs to come gather, be resourced, and launch with a vision of, getting people that want to do good in the world to have a launching off point. And so they built out an old warehouse. And, with that, their board had said, hey, we have X amount of dollars. So it was a fixed price budget. So we walked into it knowing that we had a fixed price. We designed it as the organization wanted to, but then we had to do what's called value engineering. We had to make scope cuts to get it back down within that budget. That's one way to approach it. Now, another way to approach it is with our partner Smile Life Speaks in Haiti, which I'll be down there on Sunday to close this project out. They said, hey, we have vision. Tell us how much it's going to cost, and then we'll go raise the money. And that's great for me because it's kind of a blank canvas, and within reason, we can approach it, define it, and make sure that we've got the cost. And for this project specifically, we had to validate the numbers. We're working with an indigenous construction crew. We're wanting to make sure that every brick and stone and a piece of metal is accounted for in the building. So we brought in some industry professionals to check the estimates and come in to make sure that the numbers made sense. And ultimately, that created our high water mark. Now, if we were able to do it for less, that's great. That's an awesome story. And I've got an example we'll share here in a little bit. Another cost that too often gets overlooked is what's the operational budget add by adding a new facility, meaning how much are we going to have to pay for the lights? How much toilet paper are we going to have to put in the bathrooms?
All the time.
Adding that to your annual fund is key. And so we want to make sure that we identify and help them in that process, and that it's being, but then there's another operational cost that gets overlooked all the time. And that's deferred maintenance and ongoing maintenance. So over the course of the life of the building, do you have it in your operating budget, a fund that hopefully grows so that when that air conditioning unit goes out, you've got money to go replace it? When something breaks in the building, you've got reserves that you're pulling out of. And so those are conversations that we have that we think are very important. And inevitably, that spurns conversations from a budgetary standpoint with the annual fundraising. The last best practice I'll share with you is contingency. Now, we talk about contingency all day long, but oftentimes I mention that, and our ministry partners have no idea what that means. And so in looking at contingency, that's planning for the unexpected. We've got a project in Atlanta that, as we were going through the process, we had done some soil testing, and it came back kind of like, it's okay, not bad. Well, we were tearing down an old building, and what we didn't have is underneath that building what the soil conditions were. And so as we're pulling up the old foundation so we can start on our new foundation, we find out that there's a bunch of old rubble and rocks and bricks and stuff in there. And then we have some more soil tests done because it's like slime, and we find out the soil conditions aren't good. So having a contingency allowed us to plan for the unexpected, which ended up being that we had a significant increase in the budget that we pulled out of contingency in change orders to do helical piers. I mean, this is the footprint on this
undertaking.
Yeah, it's a big undertaking. It's a lot of science. It's a lot of consultants that we were able to bring into the project that are smarter than me. But because we had those funds in reserves, then we draw from those funds and are able to not have to go out and raise an additional $50,000.
So I guess my question then, and you may be getting there, I'm an executive director. I've got a committee where I'm working with a contractor, and they come to me and they say, let's talk about your contingency budget. What number should I be expecting?
Yeah, I'm a huge advocate of 10% at a minimum. We just recently, we've got a project in Kenya with our partner Valley Light and their funding partner in America, Just One Africa. We knew that when the contractor put their budget together, that we hadn't picked tile or anything like that. We'd gotten a base price, but we knew that there were going to be some upgrades that we needed to make. So we put a 20% contingency on that project. And thankfully we were able to start to draw out of that because we realized, his expectations of finishes weren't quite our expectations. We wanted to beef up the hot water system. They use solar powered hot water. And so, yeah, we've been kind of using that as our bucket to do upgrades to the project because we planned for it.
So 10% would be the
Yeah.
starting point, but it could ebb and flow a little bit
Ebb
depending
and
on
flows.
the project or your perspective with the client. Okay.
Exactly.
That's
And
helpful.
depending upon where the project is, the scope of the project, there's times I might go down to 5 to 8%, but 10% is generally the number that we start with. And then we talk through, do we need to increase or decrease it? And so, yeah, I mean, my lesson on this is planning for the unexpected never hurt anybody. The worst case scenario is that you have to use your reserves to cover, an unforeseen condition. The best case scenario for you as nonprofit leaders is that when you come in under budget, you get to brag about it. There is nothing more compelling than at the end of a capital campaign, you say, we budgeted this and we delivered for this and we saved X amount of dollars. Give us more money next time we ask for the next capital campaign.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So I want to move us on here to the third pillar that we have, and that's the impact that it has on leadership. I really like Lindy's quote from earlier, where she said she wore many hats, but the hard hat was not one she anticipated wearing as much as she did. I actually heard her saying that on her way. She was running out of a meeting to meet with the site supervisor at the new construction site. And so I think about the roles. If you've worked in a nonprofit, there's no doubt you've worn many hats in your role. You've served different functions just to move the mission forward, to move the organization forward in your community. So when you work with nonprofits, can you kind of describe what is appropriate or what the expectation should be for the Lindys, the executive directors, and where is that line drawn between the architects and the site supervisors and the contractors? What does that look like in a healthy relationship?
Yeah. So, as a nonprofit leader, this is realistic for me because, I deal with board, budget, staff, operations, our contingency of ministry partners, volunteers, that all flows up the org chart to me at the top. And, what we've noticed is that then you start to add construction manager onto the org chart as far as responsibilities, and you're asking your ED or your CEO, whatever that position is. All right, now you got to manage the architect, and now you got to ping
Board
the
chair,
contractor. Yeah. And it's burdensome. I mean, if you're a nonprofit leader and you aren't experiencing some level of burnout anxiety, you're probably not being honest with yourself. And that's a real conversation. I'm talking as a peer here. And so what we said is, and it took us a couple of years to kind of define it. But I mentioned this project here in Plywood, and Jeff Schennebarger is a friend. And after we finished the project, we were sitting around and he's like, do you know why my board hired you? And I was like, to manage this project that's amazing. And, it was great. And he was like, no. Do you know why they really hired you? And I was like, no, I'm not following, Jeff. Tell me. And he said, they hired you because there was a going concern that adding one more thing was going to send me spiraling into burnout.
That's it.
And Jeff actually, they host an event every fall in August. And he just, at the most recent Plywood Presents, he shared 2 years prior, as the building project was just about to get started, a poignant moment. It had nothing to do with construction, but it had everything to do with construction. As he's entering the last day of this major event, it's their biggest thing they do every year. He's in the green room before anybody shows up, curled up in a ball. I mean, crying. I mean, I get the image that he was almost sweating blood from the fact that all this was coming down on him, and he was questioning every part of his qualification to lead the organization. And construction would have just been another thing on the list that pushed him into that hole. So, it doesn't have to be third lens, but to Lindy's point, wearing the construction hat shouldn't always fall on the ministry leader. There are people out there, whether it's us or construction professionals that do this for a living, or you may have a volunteer that's retired. Push back against adding that to your job description. I'm a huge fan of the book Essentialism. We're actually going through it as a staff right now. And if you have a construction project on the horizon, I think it would behoove you with your board to sit down and talk about all the things that you do and all the things that are mission critical towards executing the vision of your organization. And I think what you'll find is managing a construction project isn't going to fall anywhere on the essentials of your job. And, burnout's real. Don't dismiss it. It's an active conversation I have individually and corporately with my board. And I'd encourage you that if there is a construction project on the horizon or a major capital campaign, ask for their help, ask for resources, ask for professionals to speak into it, because this could just be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yeah. I think as a general rule, capital campaigns are a draw for executive directors. I think, nonprofit leadership wants to be a part of this exciting season in the nonprofit's life. So I just always kind of am saddened when it turns the other way and just becomes an overwhelming burden throughout the process. But
yeah, and our goal is, if we're the one touch point to the organization's leadership, including their board, if we're that singular touch point and we just bring you high level, here's where we are, here's where we're tracking, then maybe that simplifies yes, it falls under your responsibility, but you're not having to drive it on a daily basis. You just have to manage the one component.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think it continues to go back to confidence in the process. So, well, the last pillar we wanted to talk about is just missed opportunities. Brian, I think about when I see healthy nonprofits create leadership teams, or they create and build their board of directors, they're very methodical in how they do that. They do it with a high level of precision. They find individuals who align with their mission. They're representative of the communities that they serve. They're highly skilled in a vocation or an industry, but they're individuals who can, in their own way, move the organization forward. But when I see organizations build out capital campaign planning teams or steering committees, this is completely anecdotal. I don't always see the same precision. They certainly have some of those individuals and board members as a part of that, but they have major donor prospects, but I don't see the depth of that precision. That's not exclusive, but at times I certainly don't. I think that's a missed opportunity when you see ways that nonprofits are operating and carrying out these campaigns. From your perspective, now ask you to put your construction hat on. What are some missed opportunities that you're seeing or your team is seeing through their constant engagement with nonprofits?
So another book recommendation. I'm a raving fan when it comes to Good to Great by Jim Collins. In that book, there's two concepts that resonate with me very closely to the mission and vision of what we're trying to do here at Third Lens. The first is having the right people in the right seats on your bus. Another way of saying that is, running in the lanes of your gifting. And, if we're being honest with our inner hedgehog and finding the Venn diagram sweet spot of our giftings, what we can monetize, and our passions, we'd look at, okay, a nonprofit leader, leading a hospital, running a children's home. That's the lane they run in. We run in a completely different lane. But when you bring a team together and you have all your lanes full, you have all the seats on your bus full, that's a strong machine. That's how you get things done. You bring in a fundraising professional to do your feasibility study, to run your campaign, to coach your team. And so first, I think building that team is essential. Sometimes that can be done internally, but sometimes it has to be externally. The other part of it is that I think there's a missed opportunity to truly engage a nonprofit's network and tap into their network. By that, I mean, within your board, you may have a couple people that have background in real estate construction, or at least, but are we asking the question, or making the invitation, hey, I want you to be a part of this project because I know you've built something before. I know you run a successful business and you have a facility. And so proactively reaching out to that network of volunteers, staff, and saying, hey, who wants to be a part of this project? I'll mention plywood again, just a great example of teamwork. So you see this image here that has the total budget of the project. This is the value, fair market value of this build out of this interior space, $1.67 million, give or take. Well, what if I was to tell you that in reality, the budget for construction was only $900,000 and they had about $100,000 for furniture, fixtures, equipment. They have an event space in here, so there's a huge LED screen. This project, we saw almost $600,000 in cost savings. And I'll explain how that happened. And it was a poignant moment that
please explain
that I'm excited about. And again, this is like our champion, project. So please don't have these expectations for every project. But on this one, there was direct conversations with the board that within the board they created a building committee. That's probably not uncommon to any of you. What we did is from a funding standpoint, we knew what our high water mark was. That was our budget. So we had a hard budget ceiling. We made cuts to get our budget within that ceiling. But then because the team, and that included, the Third Lens side, it included our architect, it included all of our volunteers, because everybody on the team believed so much in the mission, we ended up tapping into our networks heavily. The architect, Ashley McClure, who's a good friend of mine and serves on our advisory committee, he works for Gensler, the largest architecture firm in the world now. He actually went to vendor contacts of his and got all the furniture donated, got all the light fixtures donated, and even one-off things like the sound wall boards that deafen sound. He found people that were willing to give and leveraged his network. He also went to his firm and said, hey, this is a worthwhile cause. And they donated 90% of their design fees. All the engineers that we helped recruit to the project donated their services, tens of thousands of dollars. And then the board, as we're sitting there with the committee, we started to name off all the different areas where we could use their help. Well, one board member starts saying, oh, I know so-and-so. And another one says, oh, I know so-and-so, he works there. Oh, I know this. Next thing you know, it starts cascading. So then we start creating a tracking mechanism where we're managing the board members out there making the asks for everything. I mean, all the tile, all the flooring was donated, the whiteboards for the conference rooms, the appliances. We even had one of the board members, he committed to buy heated seats for the toilets. I don't know why that still sticks with me. It's probably because you're like heated seats for the toilets. Anyway,
hey, why not?
He's a raving fan of heated toilet seats and bidets. But all that to say is we created an opportunity for people within the network of plywood to jump on board and network for the project. And so all we did was we asked them, who do you know that we need to know specific to this project? It's a John Maxwell quote. He suggests that anytime you're in a meeting with someone, you ask, hey, who do you know that I need to know? It's a great question for nonprofit leaders. But I think there's an application specific to a construction project, because if you can get connected with that one person that's one Kevin Bacon layer outside of your network, the project will see things happen. It could be the contractor, it could be the guy that provides heated bidet seats for your project. But if you don't ask, then we've missed that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a construction project like this, I think it's good for organizations to remember that all dollars are created equally, whether that's an actual dollar or an in-kind dollar. And so it all contributes to the bottom line. Hey, Stephen, we're excited to share some of this information. At the very least, we hope that this will give organizations considering a capital campaign just something to think about, some ways to create some efficiencies with their contract vendors or partners in the community. So we're glad to answer any questions if there are any.
Yeah, absolutely. But first, thank you, gentlemen. This is really interesting to listen to and hear the stories. I really love the resources you provided, especially that timeline. So thank you. This was really really enlightening, at least for me personally, because I don't know too much about capital campaigns. So hopefully the rest of you enjoyed it. I think they did. I've seen some chats to that effect. But yeah, we probably got about 7 or 8 minutes for questions. So if you haven't asked a question yet, now is the time. And I know you guys were chatting answers to a couple questions, so I'll try to avoid those. But there's some good ones in here. One from Holly. Holly says, just started a capital campaign. They're in the silent phase. They're doing the feasibility study right now. They did another capital campaign in 2010, and some of their current donors contributed to that capital campaign, 10 or 11 years ago. How would you recommend approaching those folks? Maybe you're going back to the well kind of quickly and, with another campaign. Any thoughts for maybe segmenting communications to those folks who just gave, about a decade ago to the last campaign?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I probably need to know more about it to give my best answer. But I think fundraising and capital campaigns are all about storytelling. And so, what is the story that your organization is telling from the last campaign to this one? What is the need in the community now? And then, as I always talk to my clients about, you really need to paint the picture as to why are you uniquely positioned to meet that need. And so there are certainly some dynamics that come through in terms of, what was the frequency of the last gift? How well have we stewarded them between those gifts? And so there are some dynamics in there I would want to know more about. But I think continued conversation about your story, your impact, and their role in that is probably where I would begin.
I love it. Makes sense. There's been a few questions kind of, I think the heated bidet seats got people thinking about. By the way, I really have to know what the fair market value of that is, but that's another
And
question.
I'm really glad I made it into the transcript as well.
Well, got some people thinking, because we got some questions about those in-kind donations, pro bono services. Is that something that you should, kind of be counting on, or is it just kind of a nice thing to be surprised by? Does that impact maybe the contractor's budget when you're planning those things? Is that a reasonable expectation that those things would happen, or just kind of a nice thing after the fact? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would approach a project as if you're going to get 0 in-kind donations.
Okay.
So that's in creating the high watermark, that ceiling, that's your worst case scenario. So I mentioned Church Missions Network. We're going into it. The number that we're providing to them when we finish design and budget for them is going to be the worst case scenario. So it's going to include everything, as if you paid every dollar for every piece of it. The fun story, the plywood type story is once you start leveraging that network and start bringing it down, we actually have a budget where we create the high watermark. Well, then we start throwing in the in-kind, and then we start throwing in the actual costs. And if we're able to save any money, and if we don't use contingency, then at the end of the project, that mechanism says, hey, yeah, we had the $1.7 million project, but we did it for a little over $1 million. So yeah, for planning purposes, I'd be remiss if I told you to count on anything at all. It's just not a realistic expectation. It's a crazy world out there that could pivot in a heartbeat, where, architects can't do pro bono services anymore. Tax law could change. Whatever that variable is, you can't plan for it. So if we're truly following the process, we create the worst case scenario, and then we manage it down to the best case scenario.
That makes a lot of sense. And, the other side of that, since you mentioned you got so many of those things, which was great, should you be a little proactive about maybe, at least bringing up the possibility to those prospective, corporate sponsors or vendors or, contractors that, I'm just kind of curious on the example you gave, Brian, like how did they get so many of those things donated? Was it purely by chance, or did they kind of actively, plant that seed in the potential donors' minds?
So as we were concurrently going through value engineering, so we had a ceiling budget. We're going through that, and then it's a roundtable. It's us, the architect, the engineers, and then the board members that were on the building committee. And we're sitting around saying, all right, well, if we don't get something, then we got to cut this. And we, thankfully, because it happened while we were in permitting, so we had weeks, if not months, we're looking at, hey, if we get who knows who in plumbing, and I had a plumbing contact, I reached out to them, they committed to donating all the plumbing fixtures. So then we take that roughly $10,000 value, and then we add it back to, okay, we got the plumbing, so now we can add this part of the project back to it. And so it was a collaborative effort of, if we can get in kind, then we can add, this conference room back in that we had to cut. And so it's a back and forth, but it was process oriented. We had a weekly meeting going through the budget, trying to find where we could, squeeze, a quarter out of a penny. And ultimately we were able to deliver, the minimum viable product plus some of the wishes and desires that they had in the original vision.
That's cool. Yeah.
I've seen org charts. If you think about those steering committees that really lead the fundraising effort, you got your corporate team, your small business team, your grants team, you got your stewardship team. I have seen in-kind teams created to work sort of in an ancillary role. They're not really connected to the fundraiser, just so much to know that they're not going to the same person twice. But we build the plan to raise the actual revenue, and then every win we get over from the in-kind team is a win off the bottom dollar, but we don't count on it. So it's just a way of fundraising teams to think a little bit differently without relying on it necessarily from the start.
Yeah. And what we have is a tracking spreadsheet that's, collaborative document. And we outline every little component, concrete, lighting fixtures, plumbing fixtures, all those pieces. And then with the contractor, we identify what's the date that if we don't have a commitment, you've got to buy those materials. And so then it throws the accountability back on leadership and whoever's a part of that steering committee to say, okay, I've got until this date to go find this. Otherwise, we've got to pay the fair market value.
It kind of goes back to what Aaron was saying about storytelling. Like, hey, if we got this for free, we could do X or add that thing back in. That's compelling to me. And the other thing I heard you say is have an in-kind team, right? You should have one, because if you don't, I'm guessing that much lower chances that you're going to get anything in kind because you don't have a dedicated team. So that makes sense. Probably got time for one more question. One from Allison is sticking out to me. What do you all think about having a dedicated budget line item for, meeting with potential donors and perhaps taking them out to coffee or lunch to explain the project? Like, is that a reasonable thing to have in the budget? And if so, any ballpark figures for that?
Yes, definitely. That's part of it. That's kind of included in your cost to the campaign. For those particular items, I'd have to do a little more research as to what would be an appropriate number. You're of course always trying to get that donated in kind, or trying, a board member to cover that for you. But that's part of doing business, and so it's expected. I do know some organizations that don't really make room for that, and they kind of work in a smaller capacity. But for the most part, that's a part of, when you're talking about hundreds of thousands or a multi-million-dollar project, that ends up being a pretty small part of it.
Makes sense. Yeah, have the board member take them out, pick up the check. Good solution there. Dang, this was fun. Time's flying by here. We got maybe 90 seconds left. I don't want to keep people too much longer, but Aaron, Brian, I'll give you the last word. Where can people get a hold of you? I know we got the contact info there, but let people know again.
Yeah, so Brian at third-lens.org is my email address. Website's the same. Social, it's third_lens on all platforms. If you got any further questions, we'd love to answer and be a resource for you.
Yeah, same here. Aaron at brightstreetsolutions.com. It's brightstreetsolutions.com. We'd love to be a resource for you. If it's not us, we'd love to connect you with somebody in your backyard to help you out. But we're really passionate about capital campaigns, and we want you to be successful.
Yeah, I can tell that passion came through. Thank you both for taking the time and sharing all your knowledge. This was really interesting to listen to and connect with them. They're obviously a wealth of knowledge. So definitely take advantage of the opportunity. And thanks to you all for hanging out and listening. I think we had almost 150 people. That's awesome. I know things are getting kind of busy with year end. So it's always nice to see folks taking time to learn a little bit more. Speaking of, we've got a webinar coming up next week, a special Wednesday session. Thursday is Yom Kippur, so we made a move there to let people join live if they're celebrating on Thursday. So Wednesday, we're going to be talking about strategic planning, specifically how to involve the community in that process. Julie is awesome. She did a webinar for us last year that was really, really great. So we're having her back. So nice dovetail out of this. So if strategic planning is of interest to you or top of mind, join us 1 p.m. Eastern next Wednesday, the 15th. And if you can't make it, register anyway, because you will get the recording, just like you're going to get the recording of this session here in just a few minutes. So be on the lookout for an email from me with the slides and the recording. You'll have that before dinner time, I promise. So we'll call it a day there. Thanks again to all of you for joining. Hopefully we see you again next week, but if not, have a good rest of your Thursday. Have a safe weekend. Stay healthy out there, and we will talk to you again soon. Bye now.